The quiet was what I purchased first. The house, a handsome but unassuming colonial in a subdivision named Whispering Pines, was merely the container for the silence I had spent the last of my professional life desperately earning. It was meant to be a terminal, a final destination after a 12-year journey through the darkest corridors of the human soul. As an assistant U.S. attorney specializing in RICO cases, my world had been one of screaming informants, ticking wiretaps, and the low humming dread of witness protection details gone wrong. My last case, a sprawling enterprise of organized crime that had ended with a protected witness being murdered, had left me with a permanent tremor in my soul and a clinical diagnosis of complex PTSD. My therapist, Dr. Sharma, had called it a profound moral injury. Radar, my golden retriever, with his steadfast presence and eyes that seemed to absorb my anxiety, was the non-judgmental anchor she had prescribed to keep me tethered to the calm shores of the present. He was my living, breathing medication. I had been a resident of Whispering Pines for a mere 2 days when I first encountered Carol Covington. I was on my knees in the yard, engaged in a losing battle with a stubborn patch of crabgrass, when a precise, geometric shadow fell over me. I looked up, the afternoon sun forcing a squint. A woman stood there, her body a study in rigid control, encased in a powder blue tracksuit. Her blonde hair was an architectural marvel of hairspray, a helmet that defied the gentle breeze. A clipboard, the quintessential scepter of petty tyrants, was clutched in her hand. "You're the new owner of 312 Orchard Lane," she stated, the sentence structured as an accusation rather than a greeting. Her voice was thin and sharp, like the edge of a freshly printed page. I rose, wiping grime from my hands onto my jeans. "That's me, Alex Sterling. A pleasure." I extended a hand, a gesture she observed as if it were a piece of modern art she didn't quite understand, before ignoring it completely. "Carol Covington," she announced, her thumb tapping the metal clip of her board. "I am president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." The way she enunciated each word, particularly president, was imbued with a sense of historic gravity, as if she were announcing a declaration of war. "Right. The HOA. Good to put a face to the mountain of paperwork," I said, my attempt at levity dissolving in the heat. Radar, having concluded his investigation of a particularly interesting azalea, trotted to my side and sat, his tail giving a few polite thumps against my leg. Carol's gaze dropped to him, and her lips, already a study in minimalism, compressed into a single, bloodless line. "The covenants require a formal pet registration, including a recent veterinarian's certificate of health. Section 4, subsection B. I trust you are in the process of submitting this." "Already done," I replied, my smile feeling manufactured. "Sent it in with my closing documents. All 10 pages, plus the photo of him looking distinguished." She offered a curt, disbelieving nod. "Very well. I am here on a separate matter of compliance." She consulted her clipboard, a theatrical gesture of immense importance. "My bi-weekly review has flagged an immediate infraction." "Already I'm still using a cooler for a refrigerator," I chuckled. Her expression was a flat, lifeless wall. "Compliance is not contingent on the status of your appliances. Mr. Sterling, the issue is your mailbox." She pointed an imperious finger toward the end of my driveway. "It is painted in a semi-gloss black. The approved shade, as stipulated in Appendix C of the Design and Aesthetics Bylaws, is Sherwin-Williams Tricorn Black in a matte finish. The reflectivity index of semi-gloss is non-compliant and creates unacceptable sun glare during the peak hours of 16:00 to 18:00. I stared at the mailbox. A perfectly ordinary black box. And then, back at her. The legalistic part of my brain, the part I was actively trying to euthanize, immediately began formulating a challenge based on vagueness and selective enforcement. I could almost feel the phantom weight of a legal brief in my hands. But I took a breath, pushing it down. De-escalate. Doctor. Sharma's voice echoed in my mind. Choose the path of least resistance. You are not in a courtroom anymore. You're serious, I said, a statement, not a question. The aesthetic and financial integrity of our community is a matter of utmost seriousness, she retorted. She made a crisp checkmark on her sheet. A formal warning will be issued. You will have 14 days to rectify the violation. Thereafter, a daily fine of $25 will be levied. It is all in the covenants. She turned as if to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I did bring you a welcome basket. She gestured to my porch, where a wicker basket sat, filled with what appeared to be commercially produced muffins sweating in their plastic wrap. Oh, I said, momentarily disarmed. Well, that's very kind of you. It is a mandated function of the welcoming committee, which I chair, she clarified, dashing any notion of genuine kindness. However, I am also mandated to note that your front porch light fixture is brushed nickel. Permitted finishes are bronze or oil-rubbed bronze. That violation will be included in the same notice. Without another word, she executed a perfect pivot and marched away. I stood there, the silence rushing back in, now feeling slightly less peaceful. Radar whined and nudged my hand, his soft brown eyes asking the question I was asking myself. What fresh hell was this? I had imagined my demons would be internal. The ghosts of old cases and sleepless nights. I had not anticipated they would take the form of a homeowners association president with a clipboard and an obsession with paint finishes. It was absurd. It was petty. And for a fleeting moment, I thought it was manageable. I had traded death threats for mailbox infractions. It was, I told myself, a step in the right direction. I was wrong. This wasn't a new life of peace. It was simply a different kind of war, fought on a battlefield of bylaws and neighborhood politics. And my opponent had no idea that I was a grandmaster of a game she had only just learned to play. The official notice arrived on embossed, cream-colored cardstock, a testament to the fact that the HOA dues were being spent on high-quality stationery for low-quality harassment. The language was a farcical imitation of legal writing, a tangled mess of heretofores and whereases that would have made a first-year law student weep. It detailed the non-compliant mailbox finish and the unapproved exterior lighting fixture. My initial instinctual reaction was to draft a reply memo so scathing and procedurally dense it would give Carol an aneurysm. I could challenge the board's authority, demand minutes from the meeting where the paint sheen was approved, and file a discovery motion for all previous mailbox-related correspondence. But the phantom courtroom dissolved as I looked around my quiet living room, boxes still waiting to be unpacked. This was not about winning. It was about healing. So, I took a deep breath, drove to the hardware store, and bought the ridiculously specific matte black paint and a new bronze light fixture. I spent a Saturday on a stepladder. My hands, the hands that had once signed indictments, sending men to supermax prisons dutifully painting a mailbox and rewiring a porch light. I documented my compliance with time-stamped photos and sent a polite email to the HOA board. I received no acknowledgement. I was choosing peace. I told myself, paying for it with a little piece of my pride. My payment, it seemed, only increased her appetite. A week later, the next notice was taped to my door. A $50 fine for improper lawn maintenance. The grass along my walkway, she alleged, was a quarter-inch taller than the mandated 3-inch maximum. A blurry, zoomed-in photo was included as evidence. A hot, familiar anger flared in my chest. This wasn't about community standards. This was a targeted campaign. This was harassment. This time, I didn't just comply. I documented. I took a ruler and photographed the grass myself, the blades barely touching the 3.25-inch mark. I paid the fine, but I saved the notice, my photos, and the payment receipt to a new, encrypted folder on my laptop. The folder was labeled Covington. The prosecutor in me wasn't dead, merely dormant. It was a creature of habit, and the habit of building a case file was too deeply ingrained to ignore. The fines became a weekly ritual, a perverse subscription service of petty tyranny. My trash cans were visible from the street for 22 minutes past the 8 p.m. deadline. A $25 fine. A small, elegant wind chime my sister had given me was an unapproved auditory installation. A $75 fine. My plan for a small vegetable garden was met with a certified letter informing me it was prohibited agricultural activity without a $100 permit from the Architectural Review Committee, which she, of course, chaired. Each time, I complied, and each time, I added a new entry to the Covington file. My first video call with Dr. Sharma from the new house felt like a confession. I sat in my sterile home office, the unpacked boxes standing as silent witnesses to my stalled life. I feel the old patterns resurfacing. Anya, I admitted, my voice low. The hypervigilance, the need to document everything, to build a case. It's like I'm preparing for a trial. But the defendant is my neighbor, and the charge is being a miserable human being. Dr. Sharma listened, her expression calm and analytical. Is this preparation a defense mechanism, Alex, or is it a quiet form of aggression? Are you documenting to protect your peace, or are you preparing to go to war for it? I don't want to fight, I insisted, rubbing my tired eyes. I came here to stop fighting. Every time she sends a notice, I feel that old part of me, the prosecutor, wake up. It wants to argue, to file motions, to crush her with procedure. And I have to physically force it back down. Complying feels like swallowing poison, but fighting feels like becoming the person I almost died to escape. Then perhaps the goal isn't to silence the prosecutor, she suggested gently. Perhaps it's to integrate him, to use those skills not for battle, but for strategy, a strategy for peace. Her words stuck with me. A strategy for peace. It was a novel concept. My strategies had always been for victory, for unconditional surrender. Maybe this was the new challenge to win the peace without waging a war. But Carol's strategy was simpler. When the bureaucratic attacks failed to drive me away, she escalated to minor, deniable property damage. I came out one morning to find the prize-winning rose bushes along my walkway, looking sickly. Days later, they were dead, shriveled and brown. Kneeling beside them, I detected the faint, acrid smell of a powerful herbicide. My eyes lifted and met hers across the street. She was on her porch, mug in hand, watching me. There was no smile, no malice, just a flat, reptilian stare of assessment. The message was clear. I was a weed in her perfect lawn, and she intended to root me out. That afternoon, I drove to a commercial security supplier. I didn't buy a simple doorbell camera. I bought a professional-grade 8-camera 4K NVR system with infrared night vision and power over Ethernet cabling. Running the wires through the blistering heat of the attic felt like a penance. As I mounted the cameras, My mind wasn't on home security. It was on establishing irrefutable chains of evidence. I set motion detection zones, configured server-side recording to prevent tampering, and ensured every angle provided a clear, prosecutable view. My quiet suburban house was now a fortress, a digital wiretap aimed at a single target. My strategy for peace was beginning to look a lot like a strategy for prosecution. A week later, at 3:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. A motion alert from the driveway camera. I watched the live feed, my heart a cold, steady drum. A figure in a dark hoodie moved with furtive speed, snapping a sprinkler head, smashing my new bronze porch light with a rock. As the figure retreated, passing under a streetlight, the hood slipped. The dome of blonde hair was unmistakable. It was Carol. The video was crystal clear. Vandalism, destruction of property, a Class B misdemeanor in this state. I saved the clip to 3 separate locations, including a secure cloud server used by the law firm I consulted for. I had her. It was the first truly solid piece of evidence, the cornerstone of the case. But I didn't call the police. That would be a single skirmish. Dr. Sharma's words echoed a strategy for peace. A premature police report would ignite a firestorm. This footage was a card to be held, to be played as part of a larger, more definitive move. For now, I would let her think she was invisible, that her tactics were working. I quietly repaired the damage and said nothing. I let her arrogance grow, knowing that it was the rope with which she would eventually hang herself. My file was no longer just a log of petty grievances. It was now an active criminal investigation. Having failed to intimidate me with covert vandalism, Carol shifted her strategy to social warfare. The Whispering Pines community had a private Facebook group, a digital town square where residents shared contractor recommendations, announced garage sales, and posted pictures of their children's soccer games. It was also, I soon discovered, Carol's personal propaganda machine. Her attacks started subtly, with the passive-aggressive ambiguity of a seasoned manipulator. She posted a friendly reminder about community standards, accompanied by a picture of an immaculately manicured lawn that was pointedly not mine. "It's so wonderful how most of our residents take such pride in their homes," she wrote. "It's the cornerstone of our shared property values. We must all remain vigilant against the kind of neglect that can bring down a whole neighborhood." The comments section filled up with fawning praise from her loyalists. "So true. Carol. Thanks for all you do to keep our community beautiful." I ignored it. But then the posts became more specific, inching closer and closer to naming me directly. "A reminder to all pet owners," she posted a few days later. "Our covenants are very clear on breed restrictions and leash laws. We have new families with small children, and their safety must be our top priority. An out-of-control animal, no matter the breed, is a liability." This was a clear shot at Radar, who was perhaps the least aggressive living creature on the planet. I had never once walked him off-leash. It was a complete fabrication, designed to paint my service animal as a threat. The poison was beginning to seep into the community well. I started noticing a change in my neighbors. People who had previously given me a friendly wave now seemed to find the pavement fascinating whenever I walked by. A woman from a few houses down literally pulled her toddler behind her when she saw me and Radar approaching from a distance. The isolation was palpable, a cold, empty space growing around my little sanctuary. One evening, while watering my new, hopefully poison-proof petunias, I saw a scene unfold in the Covingtons' open garage that provided a sudden, clarifying insight into her mania. Carol was standing before a shelf, polishing a series of glass corporate awards with a soft cloth. Her husband, Bob, a man whose posture suggested a lifetime of apology, stood nearby. Manager of the decade, Bob, Carol said, her voice tight with a strange, mournful pride. That's what they called me. I took a failing division, and I made it the most profitable in the entire company. I did it with standards, with discipline, with a clear vision. I know, dear, Bob murmured, sorting recycling. And what was my reward? She continued, her polishing becoming more vigorous. Downsized, replaced by a 28-year-old with an MBA who thought synergy was a management strategy. They didn't appreciate excellence, Bob. They appreciate mediocrity. They couldn't handle a strong leader. She placed the award back on the shelf with a sharp click. Well, I will not allow mediocrity to fester here. This community will have standards. It will have order. It will be run properly. It all clicked into place. The HOA wasn't just a power trip. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to rebuild the corporate kingdom from which she had been exiled. The covenants were her policy manuals, the residents her employees. And I, the new guy who wouldn't fall in line, was the insubordinate employee challenging her rediscovered authority. She wasn't just a Karen. She was a deposed queen, and Whispering Pines was her Elba. The realization didn't soften my stance, but it did sharpen my strategy. Her weakness was her obsessive need for the structure and language of authority. I would use that against her. The final straw on the digital front was a post that skillfully twisted truth into something sinister. Community safety alert. It has come to my attention that a resident on Orchard Lane has installed an extensive network of surveillance cameras. This kind of behavior is unusual, and frankly, a little unsettling. Please be aware of your surroundings. The comments exploded with fear and suspicion. In a few sentences, she had reframed my defense as an act of aggression. My blood ran cold with a fury I hadn't felt in years. This was character assassination. I grabbed my phone and called Dave Miller, my former colleague, and now one of the best civil litigators in the state. I laid out the whole story, from the mailbox to the dead roses to the Facebook posts. This is textbook harassment, Alex, Dave said, his voice grim. It's a clear pattern of conduct, but a civil suit is messy. It's a war of attrition. You need to think like a prosecutor. You need to build an airtight criminal case file and work with the local PD. Get ahead of it. He gave me my next steps. First, document a pattern of her abusing public services. He suggested I file a public records request for all 911 and agency calls originating from her address. Second, establish a formal relationship with the local police. Don't just be a victim, Dave advised. Be a prepared citizen, providing them with credible intelligence. Following his advice, I filed the records request. The results were staggering: over 200 calls in 5 years to various city agencies, 98% of which were closed as unfounded. It was a portrait of a serial harasser weaponizing the system. I compiled the most egregious examples into a neat, tabbed binder. My Covington file was now thick enough to stop a door. It was no longer a personal log. It was a prosecutorial brief. The official harassment began, as Dave predicted it would, the following week. The first knock was from a uniformed animal control officer, a weary-looking woman named Miller, responding to a report of a vicious, unlicensed animal. I calmly invited her in, introduced her to Radar, who was napping in a sunbeam, and provided his service animal certification and county license. The report mentioned lunging and aggressive barking, she said, looking at the profoundly non-aggressive dog. Let me guess, I said, keeping my tone even. The report came from Carol Covington at 215 Orchard Lane. Officer Miller's professional mask slipped for a second. She sighed. Sir, I can't confirm that, but we do get a lot of unfounded calls from this neighborhood. I'm clearing this. Sorry to have bothered you. 2 weeks later, it was a code enforcement officer at my door, investigating an unpermitted structural addition. The structure in question was Radar's new doghouse. The officer looked at the doghouse, then at me, the expression on his face a cocktail of pity and exasperation. He apologized for the waste of my time and left, shaking his head. Each visit was a new entry in my binder. Each false report was another nail. After the code enforcement visit, I took the next step in Dave's strategy. I called the local police department's non-emergency line and asked to speak with a detective in the community policing unit. I was connected with a Detective Evans, a man with a calm, patient voice. Detective, I began. My name is Alex Sterling. I'm a resident in Whispering Pines, and I am compiling a file on a case of systematic, long-term harassment by another resident. I don't wish to press charges at this exact moment. However, the harassment is escalating, and I believe it will continue to do so. I would like to provide your department with a copy of my file for context, so that if and when a critical incident occurs, the responding officers will have the full backstory. There was a pause on the line. That is unusually proactive, Mr. Sterling, Detective Evans said, sounding intrigued. I'd be very interested to see your file. I met with Detective Evans the next day. I handed him a complete, neatly organized duplicate of my binder, the HOA notices, the 4K video of the vandalism, the screenshots of the libelous posts, the public records of her false reports, and the log of the recent visits from animal control and code enforcement. He flipped through it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. Mr. Sterling, he said, closing the binder, this is one of the most thorough civilian-compiled harassment cases I've ever seen. You've done our job for us. I used to do your job, I said quietly. My concern is that she will escalate to something physical or a direct, tangible threat. When she does, I want the response to be informed. It will be, he promised, shaking my hand. I'll write a patrol advisory for this address and circulate this file. Any officer responding to a call at your house will know exactly what they're walking into. You did the right thing. I walked out of the police station feeling a profound shift. I wasn't a victim waiting for the next attack. I had used the skills of my old life not to start a war, but to prepare the battlefield, to ensure that when the final battle came, it would be swift, decisive, and entirely on my terms. I had laid a trap, not of aggression, but of pure, irrefutable logic. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to step in it. The final escalation, the one that severed my last thread of patience and fully reawakened the cold, calculating professional I had tried so hard to bury, was a direct threat against my livelihood. After the failures of her property damage and false reporting campaigns, Carol must have decided that the only way to get rid of me was to attack the very foundation of my new, quiet life, my ability to support myself within it. I had left the DOJ, but I hadn't fully retired. The burnout had been immense, but my skills were still sharp and in demand. I had started a small, one-man consulting firm, advising corporate law firms on complex litigation strategies. It was perfect for me. The work was intellectually stimulating. I could do it from my home office, and I could choose my clients, taking on only a few select cases at a time. It paid the bills and kept my mind engaged without the life or death stress of my old job. My professional life was my last bastion of privacy, a world completely separate from the suburban battlefield of Whispering Pines. Or so I thought. I was getting out of my car after a trip to the grocery store when she marched across the lawn directly toward me. There was no pretense of a compliance check this time. Her face was a mask of smug fury. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice tight with venom, "your continued defiance of this community's standards has reached its limit." "My defiance?" I asked, leaning against my car door. "You mean my refusal to be harassed into leaving my own home?" She ignored me. "I've been looking into your little consulting business, Sterling Strategic Solutions. It sounds very important. You have some very impressive clients." My stomach clenched. How did she know who my clients were? I kept them confidential. Had she gone through my mail? My trash? "It would be a terrible shame," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if a company like, say, Redmond and Finch, knew they were paying for advice from a man who is a known neighborhood nuisance, a man who has code violations, who has an aggressive animal, a man who spies on his neighbors with cameras. Law firms like that are very concerned with appearances, with the character of the people they associate with. A simple phone call, a concerned citizen email to their managing partner, it could be very damaging to your reputation, to your contracts." This was it. The final line. She was threatening my ability to earn a living. She was threatening to slander me to my clients, to destroy the new life I had so carefully built. This was no longer about mailboxes or lawn height. This was extortion. This was a direct, personal, and potentially devastating attack. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. The prosecutor, the real me, was now fully awake. The part of me that lived on cold logic and the relentless pursuit of justice took complete control. The anger was still there, but it was now a frozen, focused rage. The time for defense was over. It was time to attack. I looked her straight in the eye. My voice, when it came out, was devoid of any emotion. "Carol, you have just made the biggest mistake of your life." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "Is that a threat? Mr. Sterling, I'll be sure to note that." "It's not a threat," I said, my voice as flat and hard as a granite slab. "It's a diagnosis. You're a cancer in this neighborhood, and I am the surgeon who is going to cut you out. You have no idea what you've just done." I turned, walked into my house with my groceries, and shut the door, leaving her sputtering on the sidewalk. Inside, I leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The war was here. She had brought it to my door, and I was going to finish it. I went to my office and called Dave. She did it. Dave. She crossed the line into extortion. I explained the threat. "Okay, Alex, it's time," he said, his voice all business. "This is the overt act. The community BBQ is this weekend." "Right. She'll use that as her stage. Let her. And you call Detective Evans. Tell him her harassment has escalated to blackmail, and that you have reason to believe she is planning a public confrontation. Recommend that he have a patrol car nearby. Not at the event, but close." I hung up and made the call. The trap was now set and baited. The strategy for peace now required one final, decisive battle. The stage for the final act was the annual Whispering Pines Summer BBQ, an event Carol had promoted with a tyrannical cheerfulness. It was her arena, a public stage for my execution. And I was walking into it willingly, with Radar trotting calmly by my side, his service vest zipped to obscure the official patches. The community park buzzed with forced conviviality, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and Carol's suffocating control. Her eyes locked onto me the moment I arrived, a glint of triumphant malice sparking within them. I found a quiet spot, observing as she moved through the crowd, poisoning the well, her whispers turning my neighbors' faces from wary to hostile. I was the designated villain in her play, and she was making sure the audience knew their part. After an hour of this social maneuvering, she stepped to the center of the pavilion and tapped the microphone she'd brought. "Friends, neighbors, can I have your attention?" she boomed. The crowd fell silent. It is wonderful to see us all gathered, celebrating the values that make Whispering Pines strong. But our strength is tested when one person decides our rules don't apply to them. Her gaze was a physical weight on me. She launched into a litany of my supposed crimes, from the mailbox to fabricated stories of Radar's aggression to the unsettling surveillance system. She held up her clipboard. "I have here a petition to formally censure this resident, to levy fines so significant he will be forced to comply or to leave." She was working herself into a frenzy, her voice rising. And then, her eyes fell on Radar, who was lying patiently at my feet. The manufactured outrage in her voice curdled into something raw and genuinely hateful. "It all starts with this animal," she shrieked, pointing. "This is the root of the problem." She stormed off the pavilion, her face contorted with rage. She spotted a 2-gallon pump sprayer filled with a greenish liquid herbicide left by the park's groundskeepers. In a moment of pure, unthinking malice, she snatched it. "We don't want your kind here," she screamed, aiming the wand at Radar. The world seemed to slow. I heard Bob cry out, "Carol, no!" I shot to my feet, yelling, "Don't!" But it was too late. A coarse, hissing spray of chemicals erupted from the nozzle, drenching Radar's head and back. He yelped, a heartbreaking sound of pain and confusion, and scrambled behind me, shaking. The carefully constructed dam of my control broke, but it wasn't rage that flooded out. It was ice. The prosecutor was in charge now, cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. "That's it." My voice cut through the stunned silence, each word a chip of granite. "We're done." I pulled out my phone. My movements were sharp, economical. "Nobody leave," I commanded the crowd. "You are all witnesses to a crime." I dialed 911. "This is Alex Sterling at the Whispering Pines Park. I am reporting an act of assault and a case of animal cruelty. A patrol car has been advised to be in the vicinity." My voice was calm, almost conversational. Carol stood frozen, the sprayer dangling from her hand. "You're calling the cops," she sneered, her bravado a flimsy shield. "I'm the one who's been threatened. His dog is a menace." "Be quiet, Carol," I said, my voice flat and devoid of heat, which seemed to frighten her more than shouting would have. I knelt, flushing Radar's eyes with my bottled water. "It's okay, buddy. It's over." Less than 2 minutes later, a police cruiser, which had clearly been waiting just down the street, pulled silently up to the curb. Detective Evans and Officer Miller got out. They didn't look rushed or confused. They looked prepared. Evans approached, his eyes taking in the scene me with my wet, shaking dog. Carol with the herbicide sprayer. The horrified crowd. His gaze was hard. "Ma'am," he said to Carol, his voice calm but firm, I'm Detective Evans. We need you to put down the sprayer. This man is the problem, Carol insisted, her voice shrill. He's been harassing me. I'm the HOA president. We're well aware of who you are, Mrs. Covington, Detective Evans said, his voice chillingly polite. He gestured to me. And we are also aware of the file Mr. Sterling provided to us, documenting months of your harassment against him, including video of you vandalizing his property and official records of you filing false reports. We were, frankly, just waiting for you to escalate, and you just did. I stood up, moving to the detective's side. I didn't need to flash a badge or quote federal law. The groundwork was already laid. Detective, I said, formally, for the benefit of the crowd. This woman, Carol Covington, has just committed assault with a chemical agent and felony animal cruelty. In this state, cruelty to a service animal is a Class 4 felony. She did this in front of more than 30 witnesses, after making a direct threat to my livelihood earlier this week. The color drained from Carol's face. Her jaw went slack. The triumphant smirk she had worn all day dissolved into a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. She wasn't looking at a quiet victim anymore. She was looking at the architect of a perfectly executed legal trap. She hadn't been fighting a disgruntled homeowner. She had been meticulously documenting her own prosecution. The realization hit her, not like a lightning bolt, but like a slow, crushing weight. She had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly, completely defeated. Officer Miller stepped forward. "Carol Covington," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "You are under arrest." The aftermath was a symphony of consequences, all perfectly orchestrated and wholly deserved. Carol Covington, stripped of her authority and arrogance, was led away in handcuffs, her frantic, sputtering protests falling on deaf ears. Her husband Bob simply stood on the grass, a portrait of defeated impotence, as his wife's sham kingdom crumbled around him. Legally, she was finished. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had so carefully compiled, and with the testimony of dozens of neighbors who were now eager to distance themselves from her, the district attorney's office threw the book at her. To avoid a trial and the public humiliation of having my video evidence played in court, she accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to felony animal cruelty, misdemeanor, criminal mischief, and harassment. The sentence was a year of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, a 5-figure fine that covered restitution for all damages, and 500 hours of community service at the county animal shelter. Crucially, the judge issued a 5-year, no-contact restraining order, making it a criminal offense for her to come within 500 feet of me, radar, or my property. She and Bob sold their house and moved away within 2 months. The Whispering Pines. HOA imploded. The board members, exposed as Carol's enablers, resigned in disgrace. At a special community meeting, I stood up not as a victim, but as a resident, and helped outline a path toward a new, more reasonable governance. A new board was elected, comprised of neighbors who valued community over control. Their first official act was a bonfire, where they ceremoniously burned the old, draconian Book of Covenants. The neighborhood healed. People stopped me on my walks to apologize for their silence, their complicity. The fear Carol had fostered was replaced by a genuine sense of relief and camaraderie. The oppressive quiet of my first few months was replaced by a true and lasting peace. One evening, I sat on my back porch, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching the fireflies begin their nightly ballet. Radar lay at my feet, his snores a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the gentle melody of my now beloved wind chimes. I had a final video call with Dr. Sharma scheduled for the next morning. I knew what I would tell her. I would tell her that I had finally figured out how to integrate the prosecutor. I hadn't needed to kill that part of myself to find peace. I had needed to use its skills, its logic, its patience, its strategic thinking not to punish, but to protect, not to wage war, but to secure a lasting truce. I had built a fortress, not of walls, but of reason. And inside it, I was finally safe. I was finally home.